Good morning, Ambassador Freddy. Vijay
Good
here.
morning. Good morning to all of you. Can
Vijay
you see
Chauthaiwala
me?
here.
Taniguchi-san, also the Director General of CII, our equivalent of Kedan Ren, is with us here, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee.
Good morning. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon. How are you? Hi, Freddie.
I'm doing fine. Yes.
Hi. Good. Very good to see you.
Very pleased to see you, Mr. Banerjee.
Very good to see you. Yeah.
And just as internationally you're better known as Tom, Mr. Banerjee is perhaps better known as CB to all of us who know him. There are, of course, several old friends of yours. Also, Ambassador Vadwa is here, Ambassador Deepa Vadwa.
Yes, I can see her too. Yeah.
Good to see you, Tom, after a long time.
Wow. Yes, very
Hi.
pleased to see you.
Yeah, really good to see
Yes.
you. Been long, yeah.
Yes, your voice sounds very much familiar.
And Taniguchi-san, I don't know if this comes to you as a surprise, but your former colleague, Shingo Miyamoto-san, is also with us.
Oh, okay. Yes. He's now in Delhi. He's based in Delhi now.
That's right.
Oh, okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Shingo-san, hi. Are you there? Rajiv, if you're there, can you just check Mr. Miyamoto from the embassy? We can't seem to see him here. Also, my elder brother, who, if you look at him, he looks like my younger brother, Mr. Atul Punj is here. Atul bhaiya.
Hi, Bharat. How are you?
Dr. Taniguchi, Mr. Punj is, of course, far well known than me in Japan, and he'll tell you all the very many things he does there.
Yes, please tell me more about what you've been doing.
Well, we've been trying to partner, Tom-san, with Japanese construction majors for Japanese finance projects in third countries.
Oh.
So this is an initiative that we've been working on. We looked at Sri Lanka. It didn't quite work out because of problems on the Sri Lankan side, not because they refused to sign the anti-bribery clause. So Japan pulled that funding. But Africa, we're looking at some opportunities together. So we're developing some of those opportunities because technically the JBIC money is given or JICA money is given to countries to counter Chinese influence. But what one finds is that the contracts are given to the major Japanese corporations who then subcontract it to the Chinese contractors. So, in my conversations with Kasai-san, Izumi-san, etc., I brought this out and we were making a serious effort to move in that direction. But there seemed to be some resistance from the Japanese construction majors. So let's see how it plays out. It's a work in progress. Of course, everything is slowed down now with COVID.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Speaking of Kasai-san, he just retired, stepped down as a member
Yes.
of the board
Yes.
last week. But he is still very much passionate about pursuing Indo-Japan projects.
Correct.
Yes. So Bharat, it's about the time.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I was just trying to get Miyamoto-san on the just to say hi before we start. But I think Rajiv from CII is working on that. So Miyamoto-san will shortly be visible to us as we are to him. He's already logged in, I know. Before we begin, very briefly, just to welcome very importantly Mr. Raj Srivastav, whom you know from the Indian Embassy in Tokyo.
Thank you very much, Bharat. It's a pleasure to join this session.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you, everybody, and on my own behalf, and not to trespass on what Mr. Banerjee will say next, but also on the behalf of CII jointly, welcome you all here. May I request, very importantly, my father and most importantly, my boss, Mr. R.R. Joshi, to kindly give the welcome address for Dr. Tom Taniguchi-san.
Namaste, konnichiwa, and welcome to all. I'm delighted to see many friends and familiar faces on this virtual meeting. We have the rare opportunity of having an audience of eminent members from India and Japan, all of whom are contributing very substantively to the India-Japan bilateral relationship. It would also be relevant to mention that the audience today comprises not only of members from the business community, but also from the government. The very fact that you have all congregated here on a working day is testament to how highly we hold Dr. Taniguchi and also our bilateral relationship. If our bilateral relationship was critical before, it has become absolutely vital in the post-COVID scenario. The shifting sands of global value chain and geostrategic developments make it even more necessary to understand these changes and double down our efforts on joint initiatives. To help us understand the current developments around the world and especially in India, there could be no better person than a friend of India, Dr. Taniguchi. With that, I will hand it back to Bharat, as I know we are eagerly looking forward to hearing from our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chandra Banerjee, the Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, to kindly make his address.
Thank you very much, Bharat, and again, Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, the warm welcome from the Confederation of Indian Industry, and great to see you here once again. And it's always a pleasure and listening to you for your a lot of wisdom, lot of thoughts, lots of inputs that keep always coming from you, and we greatly value that for those very important points that you always make. And we look forward to listening to you very soon. I can see some very important faces here, former ambassadors, excellencies. Thanks for everybody. Thanks to everybody for joining this very important session. We have very good representations from both our embassies, for Delhi as well as Tokyo. And really happy to see them also present over here. And Dr. Taniguchi, I just wanted to mention that your insights into some of the global strategic issues that one has been seeing and following are indeed of very great, not only just great interest to us, but I must say that during this time of the coronavirus pandemic, that's where things, the global equations are getting completely transformed. It would be very, very important for us to get those references. And post the crisis, the world is really likely to emerge into a completely new normal, which all of us understand, and which is still, at this point in time, that new normal is still evolving. And your perspectives on just how Japan views geostrategic and geo-economic developments will be very, very important to us at the Indian industry. And today, from the Indian industry, we have some very high-level participation to listen to you and to interact with you. And of course, Japan's successful management of the pandemic and also kickstarting the economy so very smoothly is a lesson for the entire world. And And our relationships, as we have seen, is phenomenal at this point in time. The leadership of the two countries, their equations, and the way it translates into equations, both at the economic level and otherwise, is just phenomenal. And Japan has always been a top partner for India. It's amongst our leading investors and has been extremely generous in terms of transferring technology and know-how through development projects like the DMIDC, and so on and so forth. So it's been always a pleasure working with Japan as a country, as business from India. And Japanese companies also I find in India a vibrant and a rapidly growing market, very facilitative investment climate today, and multiple sectors of investments. And these companies who are present here from Japan have a wide and a deep footprint also today with the Indian industry, and we really have excellent relationships over here. Excellency, we also believe that the private sectors of the two countries working together could be indeed instrumental in redefining the economic landscape of the Asian and the Indo-Pacific region. And our cooperation in areas such as defense manufacturing and technology, and areas like clean energy or information and communications technology, or even very important areas like biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, could be amongst others, many others, establish a very new dynamic in the region. And the India-Japan SEPA positions India as a very key sourcing destination for Indian goods at competitive cost structures and zero tariffs. So by diversifying its value chains, Japan could incorporate India as a strong economic partner, and there's something that we have been working on. Sectors such as automotive, electronics, pharmaceuticals, and IT, all of them hold very good potential in this regard that I just mentioned to you. I also just wanted to flag that the two countries have also instituted this Asia-Africa growth corridor, and some reference of this collaboration was mentioned by Atul Punj just before we started this meeting. And this Asia-Africa growth corridor, one sees this as a very strong cooperation mechanism converging Japan's business strength with African resources and Indian entrepreneurship in Africa to address global value chains. So similarly, India and Japan could synergize their efforts in the CLMV, the Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, the CLMV region. So as an institution, I just also wanted to say that CII has a very, very special relationship with Japan, and we engage with our industry representatives, as you see here present today, many interactive forums such as the business delegations and that we sent to Japan, and now we will be doing it more electronically or on a virtual platforms. We participate in each other's trade fairs extremely strongly, and Japan also has been a great help, if I can say, to CII and the Indian industry in pioneering the quality movement in India. And we have a very close connect with some of the leading Japanese institutions in this particular collaboration. And I'd also like to mention here that CII has commenced a new initiative of attracting FDI from key outward FDI source countries. Japan is the first country that we have worked on, given our close relationship with the India-Japan Business Leaders Forum, the CEOs Forum, which has been established between our two countries. So the CII and our counterpart organization, Kedandran, works very closely with on this regard. And also, I must make a mention of the relationship of the two industries being taken forward between even the Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry of India, with whom we have a very, very strong connect at this point in time. So at a time when the world really stands at an unforeseen inflection point, if one can say that, India-Japan close friendship stands at a stable and a solid pole for industry. And we would seek your perspectives on how Japan perceives the transformations of recent months and a sense of where we are headed. Look forward to listening to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And now, without further ado, may I invite Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor to Cabinet of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Professor of Keio University, to kindly commence. And may I also remind everybody present to kindly keep your mics on silent while Dr. Taniguchi is speaking. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for letting me join your web-based event, Bharat. And thank you very much, Mr. Banerjee, Messrs. Joshi, and Ambassador Wadhwa. It's so nice to meet you all virtually. Now, I worked for the first time for the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, when he was in office between 2006 and 7. He was seriously ill at the time. Nevertheless, he went on to make a journey, an extended one, covering Indonesia and India. There scheduled was a meeting with all the delegates of the Indian Parliament, and he addressed the combined houses. And I was very much privileged and fortunate to be able to write the entire draft of the speech under the title Confluence of the Two Seas. At the time, very few, either in the US or in Japan, let alone in countries such as Australia, were talking about the cognizance that in the future there must be a merger of interests, geostrategic and otherwise, between the Indian Ocean region and the Pacific. Nonetheless, Shinzo Abe, even at the time, was of a very much strategic mind that in order for Japan to gain more strategic space, India is going to be even more vital for Japan to pursue its national interests. Oh, he was seriously ill at the time, so serious that he couldn't even touch on any food. And yet, the applause that he received, the recognition he earned throughout his speech in the Indian Parliament were so great that the fond memories would remain for many years to come. And may I say that it was one of the reasons why I was called upon by Shinzo Abe when he made a second coming back to the office of Japanese Prime Minister, December 2012. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been working with the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, precisely speaking, since January 2013. It's been already 7 years and a half and counting. Shinzo Abe, come 20th of August this year, is going to officially be the longest serving Japanese Prime Minister in its in the country's entire history of modern politics since the 19th century. Now, by spending 7+ years with him, there are things that I have come to be able to grasp more so than previously. First among those is that for Shinzo Abe, there is no division between security, diplomacy, hardcore national interest policies and domestically focused economic policies. I have had many visitors from the investment community, and not many people from the investment community are happy when Shinzo Abe is after some hardcore national security policies. He, in his initial couple of years, succeeded in legislating a secrecy bill, without which, in retrospect, Japan could not have had good relationships with other countries' intelligence communities, including India's, but intelligence institutions such as MI6, CIA, NSA, or the Israeli Mossad. He also legislated a new bill to enable Japanese armed forces to be more seamlessly be able to work with its counterpart, again, including the US's, Australia's, and India's. It was around that time when I was asked by many people from Wall Street and Singapore and the city of London, why at all Shinzo Abe spent so much time on national security diplomacy rather than on economy. My answer to them was, I'm sorry, there is no compartmentalization in his own brain. It's not that Shinzo Abe spends a day in a small room named national security, while on another day spend in another room on Japan's economy. Because for him, everything is intertwined. And may I say why? The reason is very much simple. Japan must continue to grow in order for the country to be safer and more peaceful. Japan's running a huge amount of budget, it is for certain. For instance, the fiscal year 2020 budget, after supplementary budgets passed in the Japanese Diet, now totals something like 1502 billion US dollars. 1502 billion US dollars, or 1.5 trillion US dollars. For your reference, Canada's GDP is 1730. South Korea and Russia, each around 1630. And Spain's GDP is smaller than Japan's 2020 budget. Spain's GDP is 1398 billion USD, while Japan's 2020 fiscal budget is 1502. And yet, this and yet is very much important because 75% of which is fixed. How? Japan's government bond obligations, you must continue to pay back Japan's government bond. You must continue to pay its interests. So that's the first component, absolutely fixed. Another is social welfare program. More and more of the program is being now financed by outright taxpayers' money. And you cannot reduce the obligation so easily. Although Shinzo Abe is spending his political capital to rewrite Japan's social contract in order for it to be more focused on the younger generations and child growing generations rather than on retiring, aging populations. But it's going to take a lot of time. Social welfare program is another component that's absolutely fixed. And the third is subsidies to be given across the government to regional governments. So 75% of Japan's annual budget is fixed. And the rest of it, namely 25% of Japanese budget, is something that you could work on in order for you to improve everything from basic scientific research to paying police officers and firefighters and Coast Guard officials, and most importantly, to the defense program. Given the increasing and extending weight and shadow of the Chinese, especially maritime force, you must be able to equip yourself with better technologies, better weapons, and better cyber capabilities, none of which is achievable without a greater amount of budget to be allocated for defense. But again, in order for all this to be able to happen, you must grow. And how could you grow? That's the same for any country. It's the same for India. It's the same for Japan. It's the same for China. There are only 3 channels for you to grow. Either you could increase your labor input, which India is able to do for now, much more in an efficiency way than most others. And you could increase your capital stock by renewing your equipment and factory machines and so on. You must invest in order for this to happen. And you must enhance your total factor productivity, what the economists call TFP. And TFP is something that you must do all kinds of things if you wish to enhance. But seen from afar, if you think hard about how you could grow, about all these 3 elements, capital stock, labor input, TF, there is one vital, crucial ingredient before all these factors. That is hope, expectations, brighter expectations for the future. You must be able to have hope if you feel confident in investing into your future. That applies to entrepreneurs, but also that applies to young men and women. After all, you must encourage young men and women to make families and to give birth to more babies. If you wish to grow your labor input. And certainly, if you would like to spend more on capital stock, you must be able to have a long-term positive expectation for the future, i.e., hope. Over the last 7.5 years, my experiences with Shinzo Abe have told me that Shinzo Abe's so-called Abenomics economic policy package has focused on giving seeds of hope to the Japanese, especially future generations. Here, you see there is a merger between Japan's domestic interests and Japan's external concerns. Needless to say, Japan is an island nation, but it's a unique island nation in comparison to other island nations such as New Zealand. Japan just happens to be very geographically close to 3 nuclear armed states, and every one of which is openly hostile to Japan in particular and to the liberal democratic order in general, namely Russia, China, and in between North Korea. North Korea is a semi-proclaimed nuclear power, but China and Russia are openly admitting that they are decreasing nuclear arsenal, its warheads, and its capabilities. Among other developed nations, may I say, Japan is probably the only nation solely exposed to nuclear capabilities of these rather hostile nations. If Japan remains economically weak, if Japan remains hopeless, if people on the soil of Japan remain rather backward looking and inward looking, Japan will most likely easily find itself squeezed into something that I call geopsychological cul-de-sac, right? In order for Japan to be able to feel that Japan is not alone, Japan's strategic space is not narrow. It needs friends and partners. Obviously, the age-old alliance partner of the United States value should remain the most important, which is why Shinzo Abe has been doing a commendable job in cultivating ties both with Barack Obama and then Donald Trump, 2 of the polar opposite figures. And I am very much certain, even if Biden prevails, Shinzo Abe is going to do his utmost to establishing as good ties with President Biden, with Trump and Obama. But it had been until quite recently a one-legged stool. Japan's national security hinged so much on one single source of the bilateral alliance between the United States and Japan. So in order for Japan to really be able to widen its geostrategic space, it needed 2, 3 more legs to sustain the stool in a robust and sustainable way. And obviously, India's importance matters here. Well, Australia is important, of course, but India's uniqueness bears a special weight for Japan's strategic. Why? There are 3 or 4 reasons, and may I say one by one. First, India is the biggest democratic power in the Indian Ocean region. And India's vantage point should tell us an enormous amount to the Japanese. Second, Indian Ocean is going to be really, really, really the most important industrial corridor for the rest of the 21st century, with the rise of eastern coast part of Africa, which traditionally has been very much closely linked with India in many ways. So the future lies in Indian Ocean region. Third, obviously, without doubt, India is the biggest democracy the humans have ever had. The beauty does not stop here, stop there. India is the largest English-speaking country in the world, right? You may call it something like remnants of British Empire, but you already see the fact that you use this greatest lingua franca the humans have ever had is not your deficit at all. It's your asset. And for people like the Japanese who speak only a local language, you couldn't even grasp how important you look to the eyes of the Japanese simply because your intellectuals, your pundits, your scholars, your media are seamlessly intertwined with the capitals of other English-speaking nations. London, Canberra, Sydney, New York, Washington, D.C., you name it. It gives us, the Japanese, a much, much wider scope when it comes to grasping what's going on in the region and in the world. The fourth point that I should say is something that Ambassador Wadwa, when she was in Japan, obviously came to recognize. I know she went to many places in Japan, and I know that she's been to an enormous number of Japanese so-called Buddhist temples. And at each one of those so-called Buddhist temples, I am pretty much sure that she found many Hindi gods being worshipped by the Japanese. And that's very much unique, something that you could not easily find in other East Asian nations. When it comes to our shared sense that we have our afterlives, that after our death, we might turn into something else, maybe insects. And the sense that there is absolutely no hierarchical structure under the sun, from nameless grasses to huge trees and to animals and to humans. Again, this is something that's been long lost under Confucius traditions in China and in Korea. So I think India and Japan have already been connected in many different ways. But in order for us to cope better with the future challenges, they must work even harder together. Finally, may I say a couple words about how Japan has survived the pandemic and how India and Japan could work together for the new normal. Japan's lockdown policy was backed by no enforcement at all. No police, no coercive means were able to be used because of the legal restrictions. What Shinzo Abe was able to do was simply to urge the Japanese to remain at home and to be extra cautious about washing hands, about wearing facial masks, and so on. There was an enormous amount of doubt voiced by the Japanese, but by the international media. I was even ridiculed by a female anchor of BBC's TV channel who said to me that you would soon find yourself in a similar situation when we in the UK find ourselves in. I'm sorry. Japan's death toll remains smaller than 1,000, even now. It is because of the prevalence of CT scanners in Japan. At almost each major hospital, you have some of the most advanced CT scanning machines. And if you scan your body, these CT scanners, it's extremely easy to find interstitial pneumonia, which is among the unique symptoms to COVID-19. So regardless of the small number of CTR tests, when it comes to finding critical conditions, Japan was better equipped in terms of technology. You know, there are many other reasons, but after this mild lockdown, Japan has come out of its emergency state. And then gradually the economy is back into normal. I would say Japan's social fabric might have worked well. I would say that Japan, because it was a country that suffered tremendously from tuberculosis for many years, the fact that in order for Japan to cope with TB, the nation had hundreds of regional-based public health centers, among which there were many experts tracing clusters. That also worked well. Finally, I'll speak another 3 minutes about the new normal. This new normal is a unique challenge where I would say trust is becoming among the rarest commodities. I've been very much saddened by the fact that people in countries such as the United States and UK are not calm, have lost their patience, and it almost looks as if they are destroying themselves. Be able to be calm, to able to knit the lost social fabric together again, we must build trust. And that applies to the international situation. I give the greatest of my appreciation to the calmness that Indians have upheld under the challenge from your neighbor, China. But in order for us to stand tall against challenges, we must speak to each other. We must work with each other by building trust. And who else would be a better partner for countries like Japan to do exactly that than those countries that share the same values, the same outlook, and the same cherished traditions. And that tells us the value that India should continue to hold for the Japanese. And I have spoken about 29 minutes, and I'll finish here, and I'd be happy to get engaged in lively discussions with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Taniguchi-san. That was absolutely illuminating and also within Shinkansen punctuality levels. On a lighter note, I think we in India share very much the kind of treatment you received from foreign news and media channels. So we are alike there. Positively, I think, on a positive note, we're also alike in the sense that on a per capita or per million death toll due to COVID, India, like Japan, is amongst the lowest in the world as well. Absolutely phenomenal, sir. You've been very much a friend of India. I think that's the best way to describe you for the longest time. And that absolutely seminal speech of Abe-san at the parliament, the confluence of two oceans, if I may, is now perhaps better known as the Indo-Pacific framework. So these, the two C's, as you called it. And just to point out, sir, there are people with us, friends with us from all over the Indo-Pacific, whether or not they identify themselves as members of Indo-Pacific. So this is a very international gathering. And since you started speaking, of course, C. Raja Mohan of ISAS, your friend is here, Ambassador Jayant Sinha, also Sugino-san, who's the head of JCCII, the bilateral Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry in India. So without further ado, I would invite Mr. Rajkumar Srivastav, the Chargé d'Affaires or the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of India in Japan, to kindly deliver his remarks. But before that, I believe we have a brief video message from His Excellency Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma, the Ambassador. Could we have the video message, please? Rajiv, if you're there, I'll be queuing up the video message. Okay.
Joshi Taniguchi-san, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. I'm very sorry that I'm unable to attend today's virtual event on such an important topic which interests both our countries and everyone. I send my best wishes of the success of this event. The view of the embassy will be expressed by the Deputy Chief of Mission, Sri Rajkumar Srivastav. The event becomes even more important in recent evolution of geopolitics of this region, and therefore needing the participation of all the nations in the region to adjust to the changing situation in a way that peace and tranquility of the region is not disturbed. Thank you very much, and I wish the event all the best. Mr. Joshi.
Mr. Srivastav, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bharat. I believe I'm audible. Yes. So let me start by thanking and congratulating CII to organize this event and invite Taniguchi Sensei, as we call it. Not Taniguchi-san, Taniguchi Sensei, because he has been involved in this India-Japan corridor for a long time. and has contributed immensely in our strengthening our relationship. So always a pleasure to listen to him face to face, and this time on digital platform. India-Japan relations, as you know, are very strong, and I think every crisis had made them stronger. And this COVID-19 outbreak would not be an exception. We will have more reasons to work together, not only for mutual benefit, but also for the regional and global benefit. So, for example, Prime Minister Abe used to say that a strong India is in the interest of Japan, and a strong Japan is in the interest of India. I think after COVID-19, there is a tendency in the states all over the world to try to become self-reliant. And our Prime Minister himself has launched the initiative of making India self-reliant. If you see what Japan is doing is also in the similar direction, that let's make our supply chain self-reliant and also make it reliant on the partners which are long-term strategic partners. So there is this synergy of making self-reliance, and I can now tweak that statement of Prime Minister Abe that self-reliant India is in the interest of Japan and self-reliant Japan is in the interest of India. And I think in that context, I would just like to highlight 4 sectors, because a lot of industry participation is there in today's meeting. There are 4 sectors which have taken a strategic dimension, and these are healthcare. When you talk about COVID-19, we have realized the importance of self-reliance in healthcare is extremely important, or at least reliance on the partners on which you can really base your important supplies. The second important sector is food security, which is agriculture and food processing. Japan imports a lot of its food requirement from outside. And I think there was a concern in Japan that if COVID-19 goes out of hand, what will happen to the food security of Japan? And I think that's an area where India and Japan can work more together, keeping that strategic perspective in mind. The third area, which in fact we are benefiting today's session, the digital infrastructure and digital platforms, digital cooperation. I think this is an area on which we have made tremendous progress in last 2 years, and this is going to be even become more strategic. And that's where, again, I would see post-COVID era, we will have more cooperation between India and Japan. And then lastly, the infrastructure. I think Indian infrastructure has got a lot of contribution from Japan, and we are likely to see it more with our $1.45 trillion of infrastructure pipeline. So I just wanted to highlight these sectors and would like to hear views of Taniguchi Sensei on these sectors. How does he see the new normal with the post-COVID era? How he sees Japan kind of acting with India in these sectors, not only bilaterally, but also in the region, in Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much. Thank you for this session, and I look forward to further interaction.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastav. And very well said. A self-reliant India is in the interest of Japan and vice versa. Thank you. May I now request Mr. Shingo Miyamoto, Minister, Economic and Development of the Embassy of Japan in India. Shingo-san.
Hello, a very good day to all of you. Dr. Taniguchi, what a great pleasure it is for me to be able to see you here in this forum, although it is through this the web apparatus that we're using all the time these days. Raj, it's a pleasure to see you again. I still vividly remember having soba noodles with you just before I left Tokyo for India. Sri Vijay Chaltewavale, distinguished participants, it's a great honor for me to give in a chance to participate in this auspicious gathering, let alone to be able to speak. So thank you very much, Mr. Joshi Bharat, my good friend, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Can you hear?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Really sure. Can you?
We can hear you, Shingo-san. You could perhaps just do this. You could perhaps switch your you could switch your camera off. We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Well then, I will turn my camera off because the connection's not very good at my house. Please excuse me. Okay, how is this? It's good. Okay, well, thank you very much. And well, it was in fact very interesting to listen to what Dr. Taniguchi had to say, as usual. I would just like to touch upon just two things that I have experienced since I came to India. And just mention these two things as an anecdotal story almost, which I think is an important thing that we have to keep in mind as we work together to promote Japan-India relations in the post-COVID world. So the first thing is, I think that the COVID crisis and the recent turn of events happening in our region, both up north and down south in the seas, have only served to solidify my conviction that India and Japan are destined to be friends. And now here's the anecdotal part of my story, which is that, and Bharat knows what I'm going to say because I spoke to him about this, but recently, the head of the RWA, the Residents' Welfare Association of Defense Colony, where I live, declared war on China because of what's happening. And this made me a bit uneasy. Uneasy because my physical features are not really distinguishable from a Chinese person. So I started to worry whether I should maybe wear a helmet when I go to the market to do my grocery shopping, you know, just in case someone decides to hit me on the head from the back of me with a block of wood or something. So I spoke to a couple of my friends, including Bharat, about such fears. And all of them just laughed. They laughed at me. And they told me if anything like that happened, just say 3 magical words. Me Japanihun. If you say that, which means I'm Japanese. If I say that, there is no slightest way that anyone in India would do anything bad to me. So hearing these laughs and responses from my friends, I thought, oh, what a wonderful country this is. But this is just a funny story of something, you know, strange that happened in my head, owing to what's actually happening in this world. But I think it really captures the fundamental nature of our friendship. That is, we are two countries that share the same values and face the same issues. So we're destined to be friends. That's the first thing I want to talk about. Now, second, I think we should not forget to mention or talk about the fact that during the COVID-19 crisis, we did experience certain things that exposed certain weaknesses or shortcomings in our partnership. I want to draw your attention to the fact that around 80%, 80%, of the Japanese businessmen stationed in India have left already. They have evacuated from India back to Japan. Now, this figure is disturbingly high when compared to other countries like China, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam, where 50% of businessmen left, even in the face of the COVID crisis. So we have to think about this. Why did so many people leave India when not so many people left other countries? And we have yet to do a thorough analysis of the reasons behind this phenomenon. But I personally think that this means that the Japanese people, the Japanese businessmen who were living in India, were never 100% comfortable in India. Maybe they didn't have the full trust in the medical system that is available here as well. So the point I want to make here, and this is my last point, is that we means Japan and India together, we have to work to make India a place where Japanese people would want to stay, where Japanese people would not want to leave, even in the face of a crisis like the one that we're facing today. So that is our goal. And lastly, my friends, the Embassy of Japan will work tirelessly with our colleagues from the Indian side to make this a reality in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Miyamoto-san. You certainly have not abandoned us. You're still here. You're also braving your RW president's diktat. That, of course, I speak in jest. But thank you so much. I think you've outlined some critical issues extremely well. Taniguchi-san, you have, or Taniguchi-sensei rather, you have very kindly agreed to take a few questions. And taking a leaf out of the book of Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, may I, since there are many questions, may I ask you these questions in pairs? So we'll take two at a time. And the first is actually from a friend of yours, His Excellency Ambassador Freddie Swain of Denmark. Ambassador Swain, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Dear Tom, it's great to see you again and to hear your very, very stringent analysis of the friendship between India and Japan. I myself have served in both countries now twice as an ambassador. I am of the sincere belief that India and Japan will be the new axis for the future. One thing which is really keen to me to know your position on is Quad. How do you see that? Could that turn into more than a kind of loose alliance? Could it be more? Secondly, how do you see free trade as a driver for the relationship, the alliance between Japan and India? EU and Japan concluded last year a very, very successful free trade agreement. Do you see any scope for that in a bigger picture, Indo-Japan? Thank you very much indeed. Good to see all my friends. Domo arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you, Freddie-san. The next question is from Mr. Vijay Chothaiwale, who heads foreign affairs for the BJP. Vijayji, over to you.
Namaste. I have heard two little contrasting views. In your speech, you have talked about much trust between two countries, and immediately during the conversation, Miyamoto-san has said that 80% of the Japanese businessmen have left India during the COVID crisis. So the broad conclusion is that there is enormous systemic trust between two countries. But at a ground level, there is still a significant gap in the understanding of each other at a ground level. So what we both as a countryman should do to bridge this gap?
Thank you, Vijayji. Taniguchi-san, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions that have been raised are all very much relevant, and I think very much timely. And some of those questions are related to each other. But may I just begin by trying to address questions posed by Mr. Srivastava about the industrial sectors. Pharmaceutical industry, the brand value of Indian pharmaceutical industry has gained reputation in a very much rapid way than many people most thought about. India, as a powerhouse of pharmaceutical industry, is establishing its strong brand recognition here in Japan. Secondly, infrastructure. Infrastructure built up must be pursued jointly by India and Japan, not only in India, obviously, but also in its neighboring nations, Sri Lanka and Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and so on and so forth. And it serves two purposes, of course. One, to enrich the experiences of the industrialists from both nations, India and Japan, but also to enhance the joint standing, India and Japan's joint standing vis-a-vis China that pursues its Sino-centric OB, One Belt, One Road policies. And once again, all the literature written in India is easy to conceive and easy to be translated into other languages. Is the benefit that India and Japan should both jointly take advantage of. To pursue developments in eastern part of Africa by the joined hands of India and Japan in terms of infrastructure build-up is one thing that we must hope for a lot. IT and data-driven economy. That's another new area that's gaining attractions and interests from all over the world. Here we are still in the fledgling stage, if I may say so. More conversation is necessary. For instance, I must say not many people in Japan's industrial sector, IT sector, are that much knowledgeable about how fast people in India have obtained internet connectivity, which has made it very much easy for the members of the poorer communities of India to gain financial support, and so on. So that's a classic example of leapfrogging for a late-coming economy. And Japan should benefit from the accumulated knowledge that India has acquired. But there may be difficult challenges where interests of Japan and India could not so easily merge with each other. That is something called free flow of data with trust. And Japan's interested in establishing new norms and code of conduct, if you like, about how data should be used as the inflicting. It's been extremely disappointing for Japan to have had to lose the United States as an inaugural member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because after all, TPP is designed to be among the tallest bars for state-driven economies to overcome. I am talking about one specific nation, which is still running a classic Leninist regime. But TPP was from its beginning designed to be a grouping of rules-based, democracy-bound economies. And that applies also to RCEP. And I do understand mounting concerns of Indian economists and industrialists and entrepreneurs and farmers about RCEP. But there must be a time to come sooner rather than later for both Delhi and Tokyo to be able to set pace and tempo and rules for the grouping of the burgeoning economies of the Indo-Pacific region under the roof of RCEP. At the moment, we're still waiting to see how this debate is going to evolve in India and beyond. But who else could better work to set the pace and tone for the RCEP and the future liberal trading order than the combinations of India, Japan, India, Australia, or perhaps India, United States. The other thing that I should say is the United Kingdom, after Brexit, is very much keen on bringing itself into the roof of under the roof of Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, although the United Kingdom is nothing but an Atlantic power. But of course, the UK is welcome, and Japan badly needs a new addition, such as the United Kingdom, to make and keep the TPP regime as was designed. That is to say, liberal, open, rules-binding, and democratic, and maritime in nature. And if that's the case with in the UK, why not India? So my answer to Ambassador Swain's question is yes, 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 very much. It's necessary for India to be part of this growing network of trading orders such as RCEP and TPP. There is a gap between the two nations, as was mentioned by Mr. Choitanabel. Gaps exist in many ways, but while I was listening to his mentions, I was I was thinking that there must be a better coordination within Japanese diplomatic community about how Japan should work more strategically with India without putting an equal amount of emphasis on Pakistan and India, which I would say has been one running thread that I have come to find among the experts and diplomats in Tokyo who have dealt with South Asian countries. It's a unique challenge, please be understandable, because in Pakistan, as much as in India, you find a huge reservoir of goodwill towards the Japanese. That you said, Bharat, to Mr. Miyamoto, simply to say I'm a Japanese would solve almost all the problems. I think that would apply also to Pakistan. But in order for Japan to be able to play a role as a torch bearer and flag bearer of maritime, democratic, freedom-loving nation, there is no doubt that India matters substantially much more than Pakistan. So I think it's now time for Japan to prioritize India among other neighboring nations more in an understandable and acute, apparent way than hitherto. So those are the answers that I have come up with to those very much relevant questions.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question, sir, first from Mr. Sanjay Chadda, who is in our Ministry of Commerce. And Mr. Chadda looks after not just Japan, but much of the Indo-Pacific, as we now call it, including the Americas and large parts of Asia. Sanjayji, if you're with us, could you kindly please offer your questions or comments?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bharat. I'd just like to congratulate the ACTL and CII for organizing this event. And, you know, for the last 5 years that I have been seeing the Northeast Asia Desk in Commerce, your pioneering work in fostering the India-Japan relationship is very, very noteworthy. I think what you've done. And Professor Ashok Chawla will agree with me because both of us have been witnesses to the great work that you've been doing. I would just like to, and thank you for affording me this opportunity for being the one to ask the question this time. So I thank you, Taniguchi-san, for your illuminative talk on the strategic, geopolitical, and security dimension of our relationship. And, you know, the convergence that you mentioned about us having on free and open Indo-Pacific. I'll just limit my question on trade. You yourself mentioned that IT trade between India and Japan is in a fledgling stage. You also mentioned that, I think Mr. Jain mentioned about the great potential for pharmaceuticals. Now, I just want to ask you that more than a decade ago, we had a comprehensive economic partnership agreement between India and Japan. It was one where India gave the deepest concession it's ever given to any other country, even before the SEPA or after the SEPA. Now, one of the things which we were hoping would fructify were the areas of complementarities. Clearly, IT is an area of complementarity. Yet, you know, somehow the potential could not be harnessed to the extent it should have been harnessed. The second question is that 3 years ago, Japan promulgated its policy on generics. We know that Japan always was one for proprietary medicine. And when it went over to generics, it was music to the Indian drug manufacturers' ears because they have a great strength in generics. We, in fact, call ourselves the pharmacy to the world in generics. Again, 3 years have passed. And both these areas, we have less than 1% share in the Japanese market. What do you think is the impediment in harnessing these clear complementarities which exist? Because we have an agreement in place, we have so much of goodwill, we have convergence of ideas. Why do you think that we are not able to harness it to the extent we should be able to? Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjayji. You've made my job easier by already referring to Professor Chawla. Taniguchi-san, I'm sure you already know very well Professor Ashok Kumar Chawla, who's also, as Mr. Srivastav mentioned, better known as Chawla Sensei to many of us. Ashokji, of course, is very much the friend of Japan in India and in our Ministry of External Affairs. Professor Chawla, over to you, Ji.
Thank you so much. Let me go straight to the comment which I would like to make. First, a very minor, simple comment on, there was a mention about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. I would request, because this is a very big platform of CII, you know, we now use the term India-Japan cooperation in the Indo-Pacific in place of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. And this term per se actually does not exist now. This is a minor, you know, I wanted to point it out for the benefit of everybody. Taniguchi-sensei, your remarks were very, very wonderful. You gave an all-encompassing deep connect between India and Japan. You talked about PM Abe's style of working, strategic plus economic plus other things all put together in one room. To me, it seems, this is probably how the Japanese business world also works. They also have they don't distinguish between strategic or diplomatic or economic. Everything goes as a mix. So it's very difficult for Indian counterparts to understand how to address the issue or how to reach the counterparts. Should they approach in an economic way? Should they approach in a strategic way? And you touched upon diplomats' perception, particularly Japanese, with regard to Pakistan. You have touched very deep-rooted areas. What you mentioned about Pakistan's interest in Japan or Pakistan's goodwill towards Japan, this cannot be denied. It's true for obvious reasons. As regards India is concerned, you have already mentioned at the end that the substantive difference lies on the Indian side. So thank you very much for commenting that. And we have been discussing what is called high-tech or defense tech cooperation for quite many number of years now. And it's now, I think, high time that we keenly look forward to the concrete projects, both in terms of long-term and the short-term perspective. Particularly, in the terms of what you have just mentioned about the geopolitical scenario. It's high time now, I think, that somebody has to take lead in breaking the ice. The Japanese system definitely much, much better than I can even touch upon. It's very difficult in Japan probably to tell a private sector to go into defense tech. And when you talk to the defense tech private sector company, they will always say that they're thinking they need some clearances. So some intervention is required. So if you permit me, I'd like to, request for your further intervention in this direction to the extent possible to make a concrete beginning. And as it happened in the case of business world in India, Japanese business world, most of them have gone back. We are now trying to facilitate their return and the start of their business again. We at MEA work as a team with the Embassy of Japan here in New Delhi and Embassy of India in Tokyo, and our consulate also, and your consulates here in India also, and coordinate with the different stakeholders on the two sides. And these channels as a team will continue to address any challenge that comes in the way, both in the restart of the businesses, return of the Japanese to India, and also if you take some initiative in making some move forward to make a concrete beginning in the projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Chawla. Taniguchi-san, there are several questions which are still yet to come, and we're running a little short on time. Would you like to first address these, or shall we take a couple of more questions right now?
Why don't we take a little more questions?
Right. Thank you. Because there might be, some overlaps. Dr. Naresh Trehan is with us, I believe. Dr. Trehan, if you're there. Okay. Then let's move on to Mr. H.A. Shah, who's in fact one of the Indians to have invested in Japan. Mr. Shah, very brief and concise question, please. Thank you.
Hi, konnichiwa, Dr. Taniguchi-san. It's a really pleasure to be with you, and I welcome you on this venture discussions. Actually, we have got already since last 20 years we are in Japan. We have got a joint venture, and we are in the tea business, Kocha. And we wanted to have a joint venture collaboration for beverage in a RTD form from Japan, having a technical collaboration or like FDI or something like that, because India is the hub for the herbal infusion, tea, and as well as most of the Ayurvedic infusions, which are very much immunity boosters. So we need a collaborator. There are 4 companies I have zeroed in. In Japan, one is Asahi, one is Suntory, one is Kirin, and 4th is Pokka. Now you see that it is very hard for us. We are very small. It's very hard for us to go to these big business houses. How to take our talk with them, discuss with them. So mine is not a should be taken as a question, but should be taken as a appeal, and need a suggestion from you, need advice from you. How do we approach them? Because there are so many ladders to go to the right person. And we have got an office in Japan, and they can take care of everything. And that is my only question or suggestion, or I need advice.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Ji. Thank you. Next question, Dr. Rajesh Jain. Sir, could you please be very concise and brief? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the excellent, view that you gave on Japan with respect to its national security, the diplomacy, economy, and how you handle your own country and the prospects of growth for India. Sir, several months back, there was an announcement by the Japanese government that close to $2 billion fund would be provided for shifting manufacturing base from China to other countries. We were very curious to understand what has been the progress made on it, and which are the specific sectors of importance to Japan within this manufacturing sector that you want to move out of China. Is there any priority, for example, for medical devices? Let's say for biotechnology, production of vaccines, which are very crucial. At Panacea Biotech, the company that I had, we make vaccines for children that we export to more than 100 countries. We make several life-saving drugs and would want to diversify into manufacturing of medical devices, which is a sector that Government of India is really promoting a lot. And we would want a little bit of clarity as to how to go about all this in your $2 billion fund that you have provided. Thank you.
Next question from Mr. Iyer, who represents the storied and very old Shapurji Palonji group. Mr. Iyer, straight to your question, please. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me now. Konnichiwa, Taniguchi Sensei. My question is more a statement. India has been trying, with the help of Japan over the last few years, to see whether we can mount a joint initiative in infrastructure sector in Africa. You already mentioned how to keep the Chinese hegemony out. I'm surprised that not much of traction has been found in this. We have a lot of ideas in this regard, how Japan can collaborate with Exim Bank of India and the Government of India to take this forward. I would be grateful if you could prevail upon the Japanese government to see that this gains traction sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for keeping that short. Next and last question from Mr. Navneet Kalia. Thank you. Please unmute, Mr. Kalia. Please unmute.
Yeah, you're able to hear me, Bharat?
Yes, please go on.
Yeah. Dr. Taniguchi Sensei, it's wonderful to hear what you said earlier about mentioning that trust is rare commodity and the need to rebuild the social fabric. You also talked about the hope and children and the strength of India in languages and English especially. I'm the CEO of AlphaTub, one of the most innovative early literacy product in the world. And along with the leading university, a public university from India, we are interested to collaborate with Japan in early literacy, especially English language. We also believe such a project will help in building a strong people-to-people connect and strengthen the social fabric. We request a policy support from the Japan side and early child education collaboration between India and Japan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kalia. Well, Dr. Taniguchi, that's a vast canvas. Some overlaps among the questions, but over to you on how you want to, whichever order you'd like to take those in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barrett, for fielding questions. I'm not sure if I could answer each and every one of those challenging questions, but one thing that I can think about is the fact that India and Japan have talked the talk, but they have not walked the talk, as the saying goes. And that's paramount when it comes to strategic areas where mutual complementarities should be used. Mentioned in that regard included information technologies and generic pharmaceutical products. One thing that has actually slowed the process from going further, I think, is to do with what Mr. Miyamoto mentioned, that a greater number of Japanese expatriates have gone out of India and have not come back yet to India. Now is the time, after long last, for Japanese businesses to send their cream of the crop employees to India. Destinations for those talented personnel for major Japanese companies so far been to the United States first and foremost, and to perhaps the UK, and to China. They have yet to recognize that in order for them to do better, deeper, richer businesses in India, they must send the best possible employees to India. Rest assured, that tendency has taken hold when it comes to Japanese diplomacy. Mr. Miyamoto is an embodiment of such shifted policy. The ambassadors that Japan has sent to Delhi are, without exception, from the cream of the crop. And I think this tendency is going to continue for some time to come. Not only ambassadors, but also other members of the embassy, including people like Miyamoto, have been, I can tell you, among the best crop available from the Japanese stock of diplomats. I think the public sector is going more advanced than the private sector in the case of Japanese and Indian-Japanese collaborations. And I must urge my friend Mr. Miyamoto to tell to as many people as possible from the Japanese community that they should send well-trained and very much talented people more to India from now on. And that will be an important step. Soon, next month, Karen Das, Yoshiyuki Kasai, and others, including myself, will have a web-based second track India-Japan dialogue, which has been going on for some time under the leadership of Taran Das and Yoshiyuki Kasai, and previously Richard Armitage. But this meeting is going to be India-Japan only. And I think I would like to learn more about how the collaboration between India and Japan has not been fast moving as anticipated when the SIPA was forged. And I would like to learn much more about it. How to speak with major companies. I don't know if there is any shortcut. speak with Suntory Kirin Poka. And many of those managers and executives are in their 50s. There is no, this is not excuse in any way for me to say things like this, but the generation that's heading Japanese industries is a unique blend of people who have experienced, may I say, absolutely no growth in their adult lives. Know that on the final trading day of December 1989, Japan's stock price average stock price peaked higher than close to 39,000. And how much Japan's Nikkei stock average is faring? That's still below 23,000. And in the interim, people who came out of colleges and entered the Japanese community have grown to be managing those companies, but they have had entrenched attitudes of risk averse, dodging risks in many ways. So you must rock the boat. You must shake their minds in order for them to open their eyes more widely to what's going on, to see what's going on in India. I don't know what is going to be the first step to be taken by people like Mr. Shah to be able to work with such companies, but I could only point out that they must, I mean, the Japanese executives must educate themselves more about India in particular and about growing emerging economies, the vitality therein in general. Finally, people-to-people connections. I, for one, have been among those people who have been very much disappointed by the small amount of exchanges between students from India to Japan and from Japan to India. When some of the top universities in India and Japan have yet to collaborate more closely with each other, how could India and Japan work more on children's educations areas? If I could end with a slightly more positive note, the hope may be found in a growing population of children you could find in Edogawa Ward and so on in Tokyo. You get 2-3 Indian schools there, and already you have a small amount, but an increasing amount of Japanese children whose parents very much interested in exposing their kids to the Indian culture, mathematic tradition, and so on, are sending those children to these Indian elementary schools. That's a small step, but I think that's an important step we should push forward. With that slightly more positive note, may I just conclude my remarks?
Absolutely stellar as usual, Taniguchi-san, and you really are a guru, so I should call you Taniguchi-sensei here on, because every time you speak, it's in education. May I now call upon Mr. Kobayashi to propose the vote of thanks. Kobayashi-san is executive of the Japan Chamber of Commerce and Industry in India, and president and CEO of the hugely successful Canon India Private Limited. And perhaps most importantly, Kobayashi-san is also an alumni of Keio University. Kobayashi-san, over to you.
Bharat-san, thank you very much for your introduction. Am I audible? Okay. Good afternoon. Namaste, Mrs. Badwa and the gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time and such a very significant opportunity for me and for us too. I think this is not so popular occasion that to be able to hear the very live information from inside and outside of the Japan-Indo relationship. I myself, as about introduced, has studied the Keio for political science, but none of the professor has told me in such a story in both the Hiyoshi and the Mita campus. So I'm very much keen to share my experience to all my colleagues in the JCCII, as well as all my friends here in the Japanese industry located here in India. Well, finally, thank you for all to ACTL to taking this opportunity and organize such a great event. I also want to appreciate the participation and the support from CII, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, and as well as the Embassy of India in Japan. I'd like to, of course, take this chance to the future, the occasion for my sake and as well as for my friends, colleagues too. And I'm looking forward to make further development of the interaction between Japan and India. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And I think we can all conclude now. Thank you once again, Taniguchi Sensei, for the generosity of your time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for organizing this event, and thank you all for making it happen. And I'm looking very much forward to doing this sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Bharat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Taniguchi, for those nice words. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Barrett. I'll be leaving now.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. It was nice meeting you. Thank you, Bharat.